The deans of Dylanology are back at Columbia. Both Greil Marcus and Christopher Ricks were at the Hyman Center about 5 years ago at a brilliant evening of talk, during which, among other things, they quarreled amiably and memorably over the merits of Dylan's song, Masters of War. It's a homework exercise as to which side each of them took on this song. When I was in my late teens in Bombay during the late 60s, I used to think of how tremendous it must be to be living in New York or Berkeley or Paris at that time. For popular music and cinema, there was no more inventive period, and much of it was a creative fury that emerged out of radical political developments, especially in England, in France and America. I imagine that in any given week one could get out of bed and either go into a record shop and buy a great album that had just come out that week, or go to a movie theater and see a great movie that had come out that week. And I bet over the next decade or two, people must have felt this is a good time to be alive if we can open the Rolling Stone every couple of weeks and read a great review by Greil Marcus. Today, Greil will speak about some of these writings on Dylan in particular that have been gathered in his book on Dylan that's just come out, about his decades-long engagement with Dylan. It takes a lot of valor to introduce Christopher Ricks. There's a story, which I think I heard from Saskia, of how someone who was introducing him once said casually, "I couldn't admire him more." And Ricks looked up and said, "Oh, come on, you could try." Unlike Greil Marcus, who sees Dylan as an outgrowth of America's cultural tradition of secular spirituality, the former Oxford professor of poetry, one of the great renowned critics in the world, sees Dylan not as an outgrowth of any cultural context as specific as that, but rather abstracts away from such context to read the words on the page as a kind of self-standing poetry, on a par with the canonized poets in the English language, of whom he's written extensively. And like Glenn Gould, who makes us hear things that may never have been intended by a composer, Ricks articulates with his uniquely hyper-analytical, critical power things which none of us ever suspected to be in the lyrics we love. These are wonderful and wonderfully distinct qualities of intellect and temperament for two critics to possess, and it's a terrific privilege for us to have them back at the Hyman Center. Please welcome them. So Greil Marcus will go first.
Thank you for having me back, particularly in such great company, Christopher and everyone who's here. As Akil mentioned, I have a book out with, I guess, somewhat arrogant title of Bob Dylan by Greil Marcus, but I do believe in calling books by what they are, and that's what it is. It's a collection of what I've written about Bob Dylan, almost everything, except for a few really, really horrible pieces, from 1968 right up until September. That's the date line of the last piece in the book. And you know, instead of, I don't like to talk about myself, I don't like to talk about things I've done. Would really appreciate it if you wouldn't take pictures, it throws me off. And rather than do that, I want to play with some themes that come all through the book. One of the themes that really came into focus for me in the early 90s was the way in which in any number of songs in either by Bob Dylan, in the American folk tradition, whether it's blues, whether it's country, whether it's less easy to define. There are certain songs that capture a whole different America, a very specific place that you can imagine how people act, what they care about, what their values are, what their desires are, what their fears are, and they're completely, and they're often completely distinct. You can imagine that this person would never have anything to say to that person. This person wouldn't allow this other person in his or her country. There would be no place for that other person. And so I'm going to play with that notion a little bit, but I want to start with an article from the Wall Street Journal that appeared today. It was by someone named John Jurgensen, and the headline is, "Should Bob Dylan Retire?" When to leave the stage. A generation of music icons is hitting retirement age, along with their baby boomer fans. Is it time for Bob Dylan to hang up his hat and his harmonica? And it had quite a striking illustration, which you can look at now. And, the article began, the issue of whether Mr. Dylan should pack it in has been an enduring parlor game in music circles, whether part of the punk generation's attack on hippie dinosaurs or the dismay of those hippie dinosaurs over their heroes' notoriously dismal output in the 1980s. Now, however, Mr. Dylan's detractors question whether he, at age 69 and having just wrapped up another tour, is capable of another turnaround. Most alarming to listeners devoted to his seminal recordings, the state of Mr. Dylan's voice, decades on from its first signs of deterioration. Dr. Lee Ask, director of the Johns Hopkins Voice Center, says it's impossible to diagnose Mr. Dylan without an examination. But, now, when I read this story this morning, I was just struck by how weird it was. Partly the notion that somebody else, you or me, it's up to us to decide when Bob Dylan's career is over, when he or anybody else should leave the stage. What that really means is it's up to us to decide when he should shut up, when he should just stop talking and go away. Another weird thing is the presentation of age as a kind of disease, as an illness, something you could catch if you got too close to it, something to turn away from, something that decent people really shouldn't have to look at. And then there's the cult of eternal youth, the idea that the people we admire should stay, as Bob Dylan once wrote so famously, forever young, something he wrote and sang with a certain sardonic twist to it, with a hint of a curse. He wrote a song early in his career that just was released only this year on his set of early songwriting demos, a song called Seven Curses. And the worst curse, the most final curse, was that 7 deaths will not kill him. Someone who couldn't be killed. The idea of being forever young, of living forever, that's a curse. That's a curse, at least as it comes through in the way, his songs seem to see the world. But, there is a way in which, from the very beginning of his career, Bob Dylan was never young. He never wanted to be young. There's a way in which he always wanted to be old. On the back of the album, what we just saw, Parodies, the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, in the liner notes, Bob Dylan is talking about how hard it is to sing his own song, Don't Think Twice, how he wasn't ready to live up to it. And he said, I don't carry myself yet the way that Big Joe Williams and Woody Guthrie and Leadbelly and Leighton Hopkins have carried themselves. I hope to be able to someday, but they're older people. And that sense of seeking age is there again on that same album in Bob Dylan's Dream, where he imagines himself as an old man riding on a train and thinking back to the time when he was young, when he was in his teens, when he was in his early 20s, when he was a part of a group of people who knew that they would be best friends forever, that they would never, ever vanish from each other's minds. And now it's 40, 50 years later, and they've long vanished, and he hasn't thought of them for years. And the dreams they had, all the things that they were going to do have turned to dust, fallen into ashes, are worthless. At that time, he was looking back as an old man, trying to imagine himself in that position. But this sense of seeking age, trying to find out what it would be like to have the experience, a sense of mortality, is probably even more present on his first album from 1962. Really what that album is, it's a collection of old songs about death. There's Blind Lemon Jefferson's See That My Grave Is Kept Clean. There's Bucka White's Feel Like I'm Fixin' to Die. There's In My Time of Dying. There's Pretty Peggy-O. There's House of the Rising Sun. And there's Man of Constant Sorrow. Now, in 1962, Man of Constant Sorrow, it was a folk revival commonplace. Judy Collins sang it. She was the maid of Constant Sorrow. The Stanley brothers had recorded it. Lots of people had recorded it. This is the song that in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? George Clooney and his gang of escaped cons record as the Soggy Bottom Boys, in a really dashing version. It's fast, it's up-tempo, and you can really imagine that everybody in the South of that movie wanted to hear it more than they wanted to hear anything else. It was just that irresistible. But I want to go back to the first person who ever recorded I Am a Man of Constant Sorrow, and that's Emory Arthur, who's from Kentucky. He recorded it in 1929. And I just want you to listen to this, and then I'll talk about it a little bit. This is Emory Arthur, I Am a Man of Constant Sorrow.
Where I have loved so well.
I am a man of constant sorrow. I have seen trouble all my days. It's just about impossible to get out from under the melodrama of those words, to not, make them into something ludicrous, suffused with self-pity, to just make it corny beyond corniness. And Emery Arthur does. And I've always wondered how he does it. Partly it's the guitar playing. It's that bang, 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 bang. He was actually hired as a guitarist to accompany the great Virginia banjo player Doc Boggs in 1927 on Doc Boggs' first records. And Boggs said about his guitar playing, he said he'd been shot through the hands. Bullets went through his hands. He couldn't reach the chords. This is somebody a record company hired to be an accompanying guitar player. That's all he can do because of what happened to him. He can just hit the guitar. And that immediately takes it away from any question of artistry, of self-importance, of self-aggrandizement. This is someone who is trying so hard to get out what he wants to say, and it's not easy. He's not sure if he can do it. And so he ends up saying, I'm a man of constant sorrow, as if there's no poetry in it, as if he would say, I am hungry, I am cold, and as if he's learned to say things like that with dignity. Part of it is, I have seen trouble all my days. Not, I've seen trouble all my days, which is how the song is almost always sung. I have seen that pause, that hesitation. The way the singer is saying to you that what he's saying, it isn't obvious, it's not common, and it's not something you're really going to want to hear about. And then there is that steal your soul line in the song, while I am sleeping in the clay. Oh, you can bury me in some deep valley. For many years there I may lay. And while you're dreaming, while you're slumbering, I am sleeping in the clay. So Bob Dylan takes up this song on his first album, Man of Constant Sorrow. How does he get out from under the melodrama, the self-pity, the corniness? He doesn't. Let's listen to some of that.
I'm a man of constant sorrow. I've seen trouble all my days. I'll say goodbye to Colorado, where I was born and partly raised. Your mother says I'm a stranger, my face you'll never see no more. But there's one promise, darling, I'll see you on God's golden shore. Through this open world I'm about to ramble, through ice and snow, sleet and rain. I'm about to ride that morning railroad, perhaps I'll die on that train.
So that's Bob Dylan, and you can hear the way he dramatizes the song in the way that Emery Arthur does everything he can not to dramatize it, the way that he backs away from the song. He's bound to ride that morning railroad, perhaps I'll die upon that train, as Emery Arthur also sang. But he doesn't sing the verse about while I'm sleeping in the clay. Unlike Emery Arthur's already dead when he sings this song. And Bob Dylan is not ready to make that leap, at least not in this performance. But about 30 years later, in the late 1880s, my God. I'm getting caught in my own web. In the 1980s, the late 1980s, or it could have been the early 1990s, Bob Dylan took this song up once again. And I want you to listen to this. So there, to my ears anyway, he is ready to sing that song. He's ready to live up to that song. he's not afraid of it anymore. It's not Colorado, it's back to Kentucky, Emory Arthur's Kentucky. And while he's riding on a train, as Emory Arthur did too, now he is sleeping in his grave, as Emory Arthur was doing too. Now he's ready to do that. And he gets out from under the melodrama, the pompousness of the premise of the song, in the same way that Emory Arthur did. The artistry, the show-offness of the guitar playing that you can hear on his first version in 1962, the way he's making the chords bounce, the way he's showing you what he can do, is all gone. Is all gone. There's just a strum. There's just a strum, and you're going to find the melody in that strum. You're not going to ornament it. You're not going to orchestrate it. You're not going to show how pretty it is. You're just going to let it move you forward. Getting out from under melodrama. Bob Dylan did that again on election night in 2008. He was playing at Northrop Auditorium at the University of Minnesota. First time he had ever played on what would have been his alma mater had he not dropped out of the University of Minnesota. First time he had ever played there. And he opened the concert that night with "The Times They Are A-Changin'." And that night, it wasn't just the 44 years of history that the song carried that was loaded into it. There was also Barack Obama's face and everything that had been projected into that face. That's what that song was addressing that night. And then at the end, just before his last encore, which was "Blowin' in the Wind," Dylan said this: "I was born in 1941, the year they bombed Pearl Harbor. I've been living in a world of darkness ever since, but it looks as if things are going to change now." Now, how do you say something like that? I've been living in a world of darkness ever since, without drowning in your own melodrama. I am history. How can you even follow your own words if those are your words? And maybe the way you could follow them was two ways. One was the way Dylan ended "Blowin' in the Wind." He moved out from behind his organ, and very gingerly, but definitely, as if he were a marionette who was also his own puppet master, he danced a jig. But he also orchestrated his own music. He orchestrated the audience. He let the audience know that they were not just made up of fans, but it was an audience of citizens. In other words, the audience was also an electorate. And he did that by saying what he said, and then timing his words and the song that would follow them, so that all of that would disappear into events in the world at large. In other words, he made sure his concert ended at exactly 9:55 Minnesota time. That meant that at 10 o'clock, the polls in California would close. By 10 o'clock, everybody in the hall had poured out into the enormous lobby in Northrop Auditorium to see a huge TV screen up on the wall turned to CNN. And just at the moment that the lobby filled with everybody, the clock struck 10, and the announcer announced that Barack Obama had been elected President of the United States. That's how you do it. You get out from under the melodrama of "I've been living in a world of darkness ever since" by making it dissolve into a greater drama. And maybe also by proving, almost invisibly, that yes, this person, that night, was history. That he could enact it. He could enact history consciously, purposely, as all of us enact history, unconsciously, helplessly reenacting our past, our shared past, our personal past, what we've learned from our parents that we wish we had never learned, what we have learned in terms of racism, in terms of intolerance, in terms of toleration for injustice, that we've learned from our own country as we've lived in it. I am history, blowing in the wind. As a friend of mine pointed out, blowing in the wind is not just blowing in the wind. Blowing in the wind is also a song, as Dylan has always said. It's the song he took blowing in the wind off of. An old spiritual, he said, of the last song that he would play before an African American was elected President of the United States. And that old song, the melody he took for Blowing in the Wind, was called No More Auction Block. Well, for weeks after Bob Dylan's show on election night, people kept talking about it. They didn't want it to end. They didn't want it to be over. Students wrote papers and they wrote short stories about it. People argued about it. People did this not to analyze anything, just to keep it going, to re-sing the song. And my favorite fantasy that came out of this had to do with the notion that what Bob Dylan should really have done with his career was that he should have left the stage. He should have vanished. Maybe sometime in the late 60s, maybe sometime in the early 70s, just like Jack Rollins vanishes in Todd Haynes' film I'm Not There. And we see him 20 years later as Pastor John, giving his first interview in 20 years in the evangelical church where he's been all that time, where he's completely disappeared from the world. In this student's fantasy, Bob Dylan would disappear, and then he would return 30 years later, and he would appear on stage with a band, not to play the songs for which he was famous, not to play his classics, but to sing for the entire performance, a 45-minute version of the unsolvable Appalachian surrealist fable, I Wish I Was a Mole in the Ground. In other words, he would go back into the ground and you'd never see him again. So those are my thoughts about Bob Dylan tonight. And now we're going to hear from Christopher Ricks. Thank you.
I'm 77, so 69 seems to me, as an obscene friend once said, a nice position to be in. I'm going to go back 49 years, and I'm going to play something which many of you will have heard in the room and many will not have heard. An occasion like this is almost incompatible with tragedy. There are many serious movings of us which can happen if there are lights like this and we gather together on an occasion like this. But being moved by something tragic is actually really very, very difficult for me. And I will myself close my eyes while listening to this, as blotting out something of the setting. I ask you particularly to listen to pauses and how Dylan uses pauses. Greil Marcus has just said, that pause. He went in very beautifully on the difference between I've and I have, that pause. So listen particularly for the pauses. Remind ourselves that comedy is the secret of timing, not simply the other way round, and that tragedy is the secret of timing, and what we hear is something which has some comic aspects, but which in fact is simply a tragedy. Thank you. Can you tell me what to do? I thought I clicked on it. Thank you.
There was a man called Hezekiah Jones once. And he never had much except a farm and some land. He ate what he raised. But in the cupboard, he kept there in the cupboard what he called for the rainy season. That is when he'd have something left over. He'd spend it and he'd buy books. And he'd read his books, kept them there in the cupboard. White folks around the county said, well, he's harmless enough, I suppose, but the way I look at it, he better put down them goddamn books. Reading ain't no good for an ignorant nigger. Reverend Green of the White Man's Church came around that year, knocking on doors. He knocked on Hezekiah's door. He said, Hezekiah, you believe in the Lord? Hezekiah said, well, I never seen the Lord. I can't say as I do. Can't believe in nothing you don't see. He says, Hezekiah, you believe in the church? Hezekiah says, well, church is divided, ain't they? They can't make up their minds. I just like them, you know, I can't make up mine either. Reverend says, Hezekiah, you believe in that if a man is good, heaven is his last reward? Hezekiah says, I'm good. I'm good. I'm as good as my neighbor. You don't believe in nothing, said the white man's preacher. Oh, yes I do, says Hezekiah. I believe that a man should be beholden to his neighbor, not for the reward of heaven or the fear of hellfire. What you don't understand, said the white man's preacher, there's a lot of good ways for a man to be wicked. And they hung Hezekiah as high up as a pigeon. White folks around said, wow, he had it coming. The son of a bitch never had no religion.
I think it's a work of genius. I'm sorry. Thank you, I'm sorry. For me, it's a work of genius. It's a performance of genius. I don't think he has ever delivered such a song, a talking song, a half-talking song. People have different views of it, as well as that. He's never released it for us. It wasn't released. That's Minnesota, December 1961. He sang it at the Gaslight. It didn't come out with Live at the Gaslight a little while ago. I think it's an astonishing work of genius, and the genius is partly the metamorphosis of the poem and the Lord Buckley performance based on the poem, which we had before. Now, these are things these are things that Greil knows about and I don't know about. I'm dependent on Greil's sense of what American history is, and I'm dependent on Michael Gray. I don't so much like being dependent on Michael Gray as I do like being dependent on Greil Marcus. The pauses are extraordinary. That pause after said, you have works of art are partly to give us pause. If you say, what are they for? They'll give you pause. They may make nothing happen. They do, in fact, make some things happen, and Auden's poems made things happen. But all the same, what they will do is give us pause. And it seems to be the pausing in that, and the fear. one of the things I love in that performance is the way in which Hezekiah Jones isn't presented as somebody seeking martyrdom. He isn't presented as a certain kind of hero. He's presented as a certain kind of immitigably decent person who will not say certain things, who will risk certain propitiations. The fear in his voice, the way in which he says neither. He puts comedy into the things about the church and so on. They're in there, and these little starts of fear and breathlessness that you hear in the utterance of it. So you're not asked to imagine and trust something beyond what you can imagine and trust. I think it's exceptionally beautiful and very, very touching. The he had it coming at the end is, I think, particularly terrible, and among the unforgivable things done by Mary Beard in England and done by the London Review of Books was the reception of September the 11th as the Americans had it coming. Now, at that point, decent people cancelled their subscription to the London Review of Books and various other things. I mean, that is, that had it coming, that particular idiom, the particular exaltation and so on. But it's also it's wonderfully well written. He needed to rewrite the poem by Joseph Newman, which was the basis for the Lord Buckley performance. It's wonderfully well written. For instance, it is terrifyingly true. It is not just a terrible joke to say, you don't understand, there's a lot of good ways for a man to be wicked. There are, I mean, that's an irony, not a sarcasm. That has a terrible, terrible truth in it. Their political ways and so on, or they could be in T.S. Eliot, a writer who matters terrifically to Dylan. It could be, the greatest treason to do the right thing for the wrong reason. There are lots of good ways to be wicked. And one of the powerful things in the poem, as in Shakespeare, is that terrible people are given truths to utter. I mean, it would be fine if everything that Claudius said in Hamlet was untrue, but he's repeatedly saying things which are most memorably deeply true. Just in passing, I say September the 11th. It would be good if people did not say 9/11, partly because it sounds too brisk and too much in a hurry even to be able to honour the people who died. And moreover, it was not 9/11 for an immense number of people who died. It was 11/9. It was the 11th of September, and it would be good if the nation would agree to call it September the 11th and not be in such a hurry to clip it down to something that will go in a headline and that insults all the people who, for whom it was not 9/11 at all. A cheque of mine was recently refused by the bank in Cambridge, Massachusetts, because the time had not yet arrived to cash it, but that's simply because of our habit of putting the day before the month, as you do for some reason on your customs form when you come in. It's rather strange. You're told at that point it's day, month, year. Pull yourself together, and so on. Now, there's another version. The Gaslight version is in itself wonderful. I haven't got time to play it. I have it here. I mention it because it reminds us that even something like that is flexible and changeable for Dylan. That is, he changes some of the words, he has it go at a different pace, he has some of the pausings be different, and it opens up. It's less full of fear. I paid you the one which is, for me, the better of the two, because of those terrible intimations of the moment when Hezekiah Jones would really rather not be lynched. It's very, very important that it doesn't it doesn't use the word lynch. It doesn't do that. The poem on which it's based by Joseph Newman, who is Paul Newman's uncle. I learned all this from Oliver Traeger, who writes very, very well about Lord Buckley. The poem goes back to 1948. It's full of very good things, but it is not a good poem, and it is brought to life by Dylan in the rewriting of it and so on, and in the rendering of it, in the sort of way in which North's Plutarch is brought to life in Antony and Cleopatra. You could say it was very good, but it didn't become what it yearned to be until Shakespeare redid it. So, for instance, you get this, find this for you. Do you believe in the Lord? Asked the white man's preacher. Hezekiah puckered his frosty brow. Well, I can't say yes, so I ain't going to say it, because I ain't seen the Lord nowhere, no how. Now, I don't mock it. It's a better poem than I could write, partly because I don't write poems. But what's in it is, I think, a rhythmical deadness, and there's something wrong with puckered his frosty brows, and we don't need that. We don't need descriptions of what he physically is. We will get it through the voice. So let me give you Thanks for your help. This is Lord Buckley, and it is for me absolutely astonishing, and for me, I have to say, very depressing. Not tragic, depressing. 3. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Can we have 3? I'm so sorry. Thank you.
It's a beautiful thing. It's written by Paul Newman's beloved grandfather in Cleveland, a Cleveland poet. It's a black cross. Kumbaya, my Lord, Kumbaya, Kumbaya, my Lord, Kumbaya, oh Lord, Kumbaya. There was old Hezekiah Jones of Hogback County. He lived on a hill in a weather-beaten hollow. And all that he owned was a 2-acre plot and a bed and some books and a hoe and a shovel. Old Hezekiah. Black as the soil he was hoeing. He worked pretty hard to make both ends meet. He raised what he ate, a few cents over to buy corn liquor, which he knocked down needed, a few cents more that he put in the cupboard against what he called the rainy season. But he never got to save more than $2 or $3 till he spent it. For this or that reason, the white folks around old Hezekiah said, well, he's harmless enough, but the way that I figure, he better put down them goddamn books. This reading ain't no good for needing a nigger. Reverend Greil, the white man's church, finally got coming over to ask you all about the pearly kingdom and the Savior's soul for the Lord Jehovah. You believe in the Lord, said the white man's preacher. Old Hezekiah puckered his frosty brows. I can't say yes, I ain't gonna say it, because I've never seen the Lord nowhere, no how. You believe in the church, said the white man's preacher. Old Hezekiah said, the church is divided. If they can't make up their minds, I can't either. So I'm just like that. I ain't decided. You believe in heaven, said the white man's preacher? Where you go, if you're good for your last reward. Oh, good, said Hezekiah, good as a neighbor, but I don't expect nothing from heaven, oh, dear Lord. You don't give me nothing, said the white man's preacher. Oh, yes, I do, said Hezekiah. I believe that a man should be beholden to his neighbor without the whole heaven. Oh, the fear, the hellfire. Now, there's a lot of good ways for a man to be wicked. And they Hezekiah was high as a pigeon. And the nice folks around said, well, he had it coming. Because the son of a bitch didn't have no religion.
I'll be clear about what depresses me, and not so much the performance, though I think there's a real problem about melodrama and what Lord Buckley does to it, but when it shows, oh, yes, I do. That's the moment when it's in touch with the best thing in the poem and the best thing that Dylan picks up. But what depresses me is the response of the audience. And it is absolutely extraordinary, isn't it, to find that. Now, it is true, of course, that there's comedy. There's comedy in the story, but it's a comedy where you might want to laugh and you should immediately feel ashamed of having even toyed with the thought of laughing. And I think it's absolutely extraordinary to me that this was the kind of response. It's very different from people finding Desolation Row funny. I mean, I'm very touched by those early performances of Desolation Row where you hear people laughing at the excellent jokes. I mean, you should laugh at Desolation Row, you should laugh at certain moments in The Wasteland and at many moments in The Dunciad. These great visions of a civilization on its last desperate heels. and so on, full of surrealist comedy. But I think the response of the audience to that is shameful, and I think very, very telling. The question, it seems to me, the two phrases I picked up for the topic for now were all because of the colour of his skin from Oxford Town, especially what "all because of" does to anything it introduces, and the other is "don't forget that you're white" from Hurricane. Now, the terrible thing about "don't forget that you're white" is that in the world of the cops, it is simply a coercion. In the world of life, it is and of art, it is more than that. Dylan needs never to forget that he is white, and I think Michael Gray is wrong. He's right to praise Black Cross, Hezekiah Jones, in his big encyclopedia, but he's wrong to praise it twice using the word mimicry. It is not simply a song that goes in for mimicry. Even those moments when he catches the black and the white voices are not mimicking. That's much, much too light a word for what's put before us. And as with Only a Pawn in Their Game, there's a terrific sympathy for many other victims of the appalling history and society that was partly America then and is fortunately less America now. So that the question of whether or not there is a black voice, I know that Eric Lott has written well about whether or not Dylan ever really reaches a large black audience, and if so, and if he doesn't, why not, and so on. And I think that seems to me to be broadly the fact. I mean, the Dylan concerts are not notable for an extraordinary number of African Americans attending them. They're really not. Lott has written well about why that might be. Dylan, I think, will not pretend that he doesn't forget that he is white. So I'd like to play a song which Greil referred to, which is No More Auction Block. I think a superb work of art. Thank you. It's number 4.
No more auction block for me. No more, no more. No more auction block for me. Let me find down. No more driver's lace for me. No more. No more driver's lace for me. Many thousand gone. No more whiplash for me. No more, no more. No more parasol for me. Any thousand gone. No more auction block for me. No more, no more. No more auction block for me.
elongation of many at the end, you cannot do that in poetry or prose. You can do it in singing, as you can have melisma in singing, as you can't have it in any other use of language that we have. You can't extend a syllable so that it flowers into several notes in poetry or in prose. Greil has a good joke in his latest book about melisma and the ways in which it has to do with bending words, not breaking them. Works well, that. But what you've got here is something, the Voices realizes something for us. It's very, very beautifully written song. It's not his song, it is released at last. I care about it partly because of the fact that although it's very simple, it's very equivocal. No more auction block for me would ordinarily mean I'm going to die. I mean, that is, there are two kinds of freedom in the song. One is that you escape everything. William Empson's epitaph for himself was, "No more bother." That's what Empson, as he went towards dying, no more bother. That's a very, very down market, very English way of looking at the thing and so on. No more auction block is partly escape to Canada, as people have pointed out. John Baldey's notes for the bootleg, which the bootleg series, as it were, which has that, originated in Canada, was sung by Negroes who fled there after Britain abolished slavery. Not true. Britain abolished the slave trade. It didn't abolish slavery. Ahead of the United States in 1833. No more, because I will get into some kind of escape and freedom. It may be in a foreign country, a country, of course, which is remarkable for socialized medicine, draft dodging, and ought to be destroyed by South Park in a war. You remember when the lights went out in the city and everybody knew it was Canada's fault? Do you remember? I mean, was that 4 years ago, 5 years ago? Everybody, and it wasn't Canada at all, was it? Do you remember? Baldey says, the voice, a young white boy, somehow conjuring the persona of the singer, the exhausted but newly liberated slave, acknowledging his deliverance. He remembers all the others who haven't been as lucky. But it's not clear that many thousands gone necessarily has to mean those who died. Do you mean those who didn't escape slavery, those who remained unemancipated? Because as time goes by, there will be many thousands gone. And so it's an exceptionally beautiful song, I think. I love the cutting down of No More Driver's Lash, which had been twice, into No More Whiplash for me. I mean, that puts the cut back into, isn't it? No more whiplash. And then No More Pint of Salt for me. Every song is a pint of salt. A song like this is a pint of salt. It'll give you pain, but it will heal you. And the assumption that people can be healed without being in pain is a false one, politically and in a whole series of other ways. That is, it was terrible of the slave drivers to rub salt in the wounds, but if you've got wounds, you have to be grateful that salt is rubbed into them. I mean, it's a complicated position. There's nothing in that song which claims that the pain that the singer of the song feels, who doesn't have to be personally Dylan, is the same as the pain suffered by slaves. You remember the great Onion cover with Clinton, where it says, "President feels nation's pain, comma, breasts." As he stood there with his hands up. I mean, that is this claim that you feel other people's pain all the time. It was one of the very, very bad things about Romanticism, that Shelley, for instance, comes up with the phrase, "identify with." In other words, I'm sorry for you because I think it's me. Identify all the number of people who identified with Princess Diana because they too were married to a man who talked to plants, had big ears, and was due to inherit the British throne. And they commiserated with her. And it isn't really, it isn't them. It's you identify with the other person, and you can imagine somebody else's, you can care about somebody else's suffering only if you actually take it to be yours. These are moral and spiritual things which I think are continuous with what Greil was talking about. They have to do with self-aggrandizement. They have to do with claims to spiritual sensibility. I think this song does not make that mistake. I'll just say something about where I think Dylan both did and didn't make a mistake. The Death of Emmett Till is a very, very bad song that he has rightly never released. The not making the mistake is the not releasing it. It was a mistake to write it in the first place, partly because it doesn't begin to convey the terrible, the barbarism and cruelty and acquiescence in barbarism and cruelty that is the story of the death of Emmett Till. It doesn't begin to do it. It is, of course, about the colour of his skin was black. They tortured him and did some things too evil to repeat, is a line which even the best of Dylan's voicing couldn't make real, and when we hear it on a bootleg, it's not authentic. And its inauthenticity at the end, you can hear the comparison between, I saw the morning papers, but I could not bear to see the smiling brothers walking down the courthouse stairs. Just compare that with Death of Hattie Carroll. In a matter of minutes, on bail, was out walking. Not walked out on bail, in a matter of minutes, on bail, was out walking, as if it were a summer's day. And now that's taking that same thought and turning it into something which is art. The last verse of The Death of Emmett Till is this song is just a reminder to remind your fellow man that this kind of thing still lives today in that ghost robe Ku Klux Klan. But if all of us folks that thinks alike, if we gave all we could give, we could make this great land of ours a greater place to live. That appeal is, I think, politically and humanly terribly, terribly false. I mean, Americans are quite often enough told that they are a great land. This song should remind them of the terrible ways, and to say if we all just got together, do you know what I mean? That was not simply what President Obama was saying, but something of that feeling. Isn't that right? America has to be congratulated all the time by everybody in it, isn't that right? Now, in England, as you know, we love saying, we love mock modesty. You can't beat mock modesty. But we could make this great land of ours. It seems to me have absolutely the wrong throb in the vicinity of Emmett Till. There's no shame in it, and Dylan was right not to issue it, as he was right not to issue Train and Travelling, which is another Ku Klux Klan song. I mean, the words are there in the book. I think the impulse that made him write it was right, but at no point in this song do you think that anything in you could be responsible for the state of affairs. Have you ever had it on your lips or said it in your head that the person standing next to you just might be misled? Well, how about thinking that you just might be misled? I mean, that would seem to be a more artistic impulse. And again, you take that same thought and think of how Dylan brings it back in License to Kill. Brain has been mismanaged with great skill. Now, what's good in that is mismanagement is never a matter of skill. Oh, yes, it is, if you're mismanaged in the sense in which disinformation is different from misinformation. So that's so often in Dylan, something stays with him. If he doesn't publish it, or even if he does issue it, it stays with him and it comes back and fulfills itself, I think, later. I just want to end with, I just want to have one other complaint and then end with something about which I won't complain at all. I think there's a very bad moment in Hurricane. I think Hurricane is a terrific song, and it was very, very animating when it happened, and it did immensely more good than harm, as Zola did immensely more good than harm with J'accuse. You know, it's a wonderful thing to do, but it's not Zola's best writing. I mean, that is, if he were not the author of Germinal, we would not care that he had written J'accuse in the Dreyfus case. So what happens here, I think, I just give don't forget that you're white is, I think, a great moment in it. To the white folks who watched, he was a revolutionary bum, and to the black folks, he was just a crazy nigger. No one doubted that he pulled the trigger, and though they could not produce the gun, the DA said he was the one who did the deed, and the all-white jury agreed. Now, that last line is too easy. If you've actually acknowledged that nobody doubted that he did it, you've mentioned the white folks, you've mentioned the black folks, you said, gone on immediately to say no one doubted, then the point that it was an all-white jury is too easy for you. It doesn't make any difference on your own terms whether it was an all-white jury or not. So I think there's a sort of slippage there. That's the moment when it moves from being, from having a purpose to being propaganda. There's something happens to its convictions at that point. We can blame his co-author, but I think that would not be altogether fair. I'd just like to listen to the opening remind you of what is for me the greatest of the songs that have to do with the colour of one's skin. It is, of course, Hattie Carroll, a song which never mentions what colour her skin is. It just knows that you will know that she is black, and it abstains from saying that all the way through. So let's just listen to the first thank you. It's seven, isn't it? Thank you. The opening of this, and I'll say a word or two and then stop. Thank you.
Williams and Singer killed poor Hattie Carroll with a cane that he twirled around his diamond ring finger at a Baltimore hotel, society gathering, and the cops was called in, and his weapon took from him as they rode him in custody down to the station and booked Williams and Zinger for first-degree murder. Are you who philosophize disgrace and criticize all fears? Take the rag away from your face. Now ain't the time for your tears.
I was billed as going to do something analytical by Akil, and I didn't do anything analytical at all. So now I'll do something briefly analytical. I've written 20 pages about this song. People who don't believe what I've written will never believe anything about me or about Dylan. That's sort of for me the case. I think this is a perfect song. I think it's a perfect song on an extraordinary scale. To have a perfect song on this scale, you remember Randall Jarrell defines a novel as a prose fiction of a certain length with something wrong with it. If you want a definition of the novel, that and so on. And a song of this length ordinarily has something wrong. This is a song I think that has nothing wrong with it at all. I think it is perfect from beginning to end, and an astonishing accomplishment. It begins, then I move to the sort of, as it were, the small things which are ordinarily what I attend to. It begins with the rhythm. It begins, after all, with a newspaper item by which the name of the woman who died after this kind of, as it were, brawl and blow at the Baltimore Hotel Society. Her name is Hattie Carroll, and the man who killed her is William Zanzinger, and what they have in common is that they have feminine endings. Both their first names and their second names have unstressed final syllables. You start with something which is not necessary for Dylan ever to have put into it, but which registers for you. That is, it's William Zanzinger. It stresses on the second syllable, not the unstressed final syllable. It's a feminine ending. And the song picks up that cadence and plays the refrain superbly against the body of the song in the way in which medieval poems played the body of the stanza as a bob and a wheel. And you deliberately have them extraordinarily distinguished. So the body of the song does not rhyme, but it has a cadence. William Zanzinger killed poor Hattie Carroll with a cane that he twirled round his diamond ring finger at a Baltimore Hotel Society gathering, and his cops were called in. The cops were called in, his weapon took from him. That's a particularly good one because it's not a dissyllable. It's not a word which has an extra syllable. It's simply that it has to be his weapon took from him, not his weapon took from him. Which there are two people in the room, the weapon was taken from him and then taken from... No, his weapon took from him as they rode him in custody down to the station and booked William Zanzinger for first-degree murder. And then the refrain is all rhymed and is all masculine endings. You who philosophize disgrace and criticize all fears, take the rag away from your face. Now ain't the time for your tears. And the only moment in the song when in the body of the song a syllable is lopped to give you a masculine ending, got killed by a blow, lay slain by a cane that sailed through the air and came down through the room, doomed and determined to destroy all the gentle. And then you're back with that final under. So Cain not got killed by a blow, lay slain by a truncheon that sailed through the air and came down through the chamber. The simple amputation of a sound there is the sound when she is struck, the blow that causes her death. And it's exactly the difference between drama and melodrama. It's intimated to you without any show or any extravagance, and that's the moment when that happens. I think, as I say, I think there's something paradoxical about thinking perhaps that his greatest song about black-white relations is one that never explicitly refers. He talks about tobacco farms, talks about emptying the trays on a whole other level. There's plenty. They gave birth to 10 children, and so on. The contrast is there, but it's never voiced. And the fact that we will bet a great deal of money on the colour of her skin is part of where the song gets its power from and why it escapes indignation. It would be like the greatest poem on the slave trade being the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which never mentions the slave trade. Thank you.
So let's put questions and comments and criticisms on. Yeah.
Yes,
Come up to the mic.
Thank you. One comment for Greil. It's been written that Dylan's comment on election night was quite sarcastic in that he said he was born, since he was born, it's always been dark. But things are going to change now, right? We know Dylan, if you've seen him perform enough, you know, and very sarcastic. And I personally, from what I've read, not particularly my opinion, don't know what his opinion about Obama was, but that might have been very, very much tongue-in-cheek. Like, yeah, things are going to change now. Because Dylan knows the history of the Jews and the history of the world pretty well. Cain killing his own brother Abel. So I think that might have been very sarcastic, and though the youth might have wanted to keep it all going with, isn't this great? The wars go on. McCain would be doing the same stuff that Obama's doing. And that's my opinion with regard to that point. And I'd like to hear your comment on that. And the only other point I'd like to make is Dylan was in town last week, and I'll start by saying that lyric from With God on Our Side, I can't think for you, but you'll have to decide whether Judas Iscariot has God on his side. In Thunder on the Mountain, Dylan says, and he sang it the second night, some sweet day I'll stand beside my king. Also in that same song he says, I've already confessed. I don't need to confess again. The question I have, and then he opens the show, that was midway through the show, he opens the show those 3 nights and a few nights before that. I'm glad it wasn't leopard skin pillbox hat, which he had been doing prior to that. But he opens up with, I'm going to change my way of thinking. And he inserts the lyric that's been in over the past year or so, but he inserts that lyric very deliberately. Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming for his jewels. Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming for his jewels. The question I have to ask is, the Jews and the Christians, everyone wants to say he's back with the Lubavitch. He abandoned that little thing with Jesus Christ. He abandoned that. And I want to know why the intellectual community and so many in the blogosphere won't pay any attention or give any credence to Dylan's specific references to Christ, specifically last week in Manhattan where he says Jesus is coming for his jewels. I wonder if you have any comments, both of you, with regards to that, about his stance on Christ, Jesus Christ, which he came out and he confessed, and he doesn't need to confess again. He said it to the world. He confessed it. But he shot it into my ear. I was listening with both ears. He said it the other night, and he said it every night. So that question to both of you, and then your thoughts regarding that sarcastic bit that there's been darkness since 41, since he was born, and things are going to change now, right? Things are going to change now. We've got Obama in the office. So thank you very much.
Well, I hate to, spring this, but I talked about that night because I was in the audience, and there was nothing sarcastic or dubious about his demeanor or the way he spoke when he said those things. It was the strangeness of what he said that struck me. I've been living in a world of darkness ever since, and I have said, "Oh, come on," and then he goes into "Blowing in the Wind," which is not a song I've ever liked. I've always thought it was kind of ersatz, and it didn't come forward that way. It was sung with enormous passion and delicacy and hesitation. So no, I don't think there was any.
But doesn't that song sort of refer to the fact that the answer is blowing in the wind? It's not in a particular person being elected to a high office?
I don't take that song seriously. I think anybody who writes a song that precious with the line, "The answer is blowing in the wind," already knows what the answer is. That's why I don't like that song. But
so he wrote that before Obama was even born. So certainly the answer, not necessarily, maybe the change. You were happy with the change in America, but the answer wasn't Barack Obama, which a lot of the youth took on to. That Dylan meant that it was Obama, but that's not what's blowing in the wind.
Well,
that's not the answer.
I mean, I certainly didn't hear it as Obama is the answer. I don't know. I agree with you. Bob Dylan is not that naive, and you know what? Neither am I. I didn't hear that song.
I'm just talking about the sarcasm point that you spoke about. You spoke about sarcasm at one point during your talk.
Yeah, and I'm saying that in this moment, if there was sarcasm, it escaped me.
Were you close enough to see how he... seriously. Quite serious. You could say enough, sure. At any rate, it would be something we'll have to address in the future. You know, we'll see what history...
I've written 500 pages about Dylan and sin. I'm not a Christian, but I'm extremely interested and respectful of Christian art. I'm not respectful of Christian propaganda, either within an artist or within a questioner.
Okay, yeah, but exactly, and this proves my point. I was sort of hoping that this, and you'll be right up. This exactly proves my point. Let's not address Bobby Dylan, your brother and mine, property of Jesus, unearthly musicians, singing about Christ. So why can't you answer the question?
You said nobody attends to this. I have written. You don't have to have read my book, but you don't need to make out that it doesn't.
I'm curious why you can't answer the question.
Well, excuse me. I've answered the question. You began by saying, "Why does?" Excuse me, if you ask a question, you should please allow people... I have said one thing so far, which is that you say nobody attends to Dylan as a Christian. I have written a 500-page book. But would you please shut something up and allow somebody to whom you ask a question at least...
Okay.
All right, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, excuse me. Sorry. Thank you. So I heard a lot about identification in both your talks. That seemed to me one theme that was very important, in particular in Professor Rick's, with respect, this particular question of racial, how Bob Dylan or anyone as white, relates to the pain or the story, how it's performed, even in the very sound and the pausing. That's such a crucial question, which I hear from you. And I heard also perhaps from Greil Marcus about how a song, this issue of not being old enough in the early 60s then to kind of articulate what it means to be old, yet performing a song which is about being old, and where that's, they're implicit about a failure, an insufficiency in 1962, I think, to take on that question, that narrative of dying in the clay, and then becoming able at some point to articulate that. What I was just more specifically interested in is that you identify Hattie Carroll as the most successful of the Bob Dylan, almost a kind of, a strand of songs about the racial question. And, that the refrain there is, now isn't the time for your tears. You're so polemical, rightly, I think, against, Prince Diana, we relate to her pain because of her marriage to Prince Charles, this kind of thing, which seems to be a kind of caricature or description of a form of identification with pain that's somehow impossible, inappropriate. So now ain't the time for your tears. Now isn't the time for your tears. Is that connected to also why the song works so well as the best song about the racial problem? Because you're saying, no, if I understand, it's not time to commiserate. Or how do you interpret that? Because now, it's such a...
Okay, put the question.
Yeah.
Do you want to answer that?
I've gone back and forth on Hattie Carroll over the years. It wasn't until I read Christopher's essay on that song, which is one of the best things anyone has ever written about Dylan, one of the best things anyone has ever written about a song, I think, that the song began to come alive for me again. It always troubled me that, just the song's argument, that what you should really be crying about, now is the time for your tears, is injustice, not the death. That always bothered me. But after reading Christopher walking any reader through that song, it's not that he convinced me that the song's argument was right, but that he convinced me and made me hear the way in which there is no lack of acknowledgement of the completeness, the finality, the reality of the death, and that's what powers the whole song. But in terms of, identification and all of that, I mean, you're right, Christopher is right, it's a cheap thing. But becoming somebody else, abandoning your own identity, stepping out of your own time, that to me is what happens in No More Auction Block. And for me, it happens in the strumming, the guitar playing, the strumming behind the notes that are picked. It is just absolutely awful and terrifying and bottomless, that there's a truth here, there's a pain here, there's a crime here that can't be expressed in words. There's no beginning to it, there's no end to it. The regret and the sadness and the despair in that strumming pulls down the no more, because it's still there, it's still right there. That's the best I can do with a response.
Well, I think Greil is always superbly evocative of what it feels like to respond very deeply to anything like this. I was just making a general point that the recent move in the matter of caring has been to find yourself able to care if you can imagine that it was happening to you, and move away from its having happened to somebody else. Now, this is a perfectly ordinary human and social question. You have to care about other people's pain, but you shouldn't kid yourself that you are caring about it in the same way in which they are. You may feel it even more than they do. It's not a matter of how much pain you feel, but it's different. Milton is superb in Paradise Lost when thinking about what it is for a mother to lose a child and to travel the world repeatedly and have to risk the underworld in order to find the child. Milton puts it as, which cost Ceres all that pain to seek her through the world. Not that fair field of Enna where Proserpine gathering flowers, herself a fairer flower, by gloomy Dis was gathered, which cost Ceres all that pain to seek her through the world. Now, it's not all this pain. It's all that pain. It's out there, and the beginning of wisdom and tact in the deepest way is not doing the wrong kind of appropriation. That is, the imagination always, in some ways, appropriates something, but you really must not abolish yourself, but have equipolent concern. Really, there's something like that. So that seems to me just a general human and social problem with people and their children. That's why I go to the series one. And we live in a time when the predominant illusion of feeling, I was quoting to a friend earlier, T.S. Eliot says about Stendhal that his scenes are a positive humiliation to read. He says the reader feels like cutting his own throat, and they're a humiliation in their understanding of human feeling and human illusions of feeling. Now, human illusions of feeling are everywhere. They've always been everywhere. The newspapers are more powerful, though, as purveyors of illusions of feeling than any medium has previously been. They're very, very strong. They're terrifically good at making you kind of care for kind of a moment. And Dylan's point is not that you shouldn't have tears for Hattie Carroll, but now ain't the time for your tears. And what is the time? The time is considering, after all, going through a court sentence takes some time in this country. Hattie Carroll did not die today. She did not die yesterday. By the time the Williams Ansing, now isn't the time. The time now is to think about whether or not the law courts, which are invested in this country with the most extraordinary authority, it's a very American song, that is, if the let you down, there is nothing you can have confidence in. We, of course, have Parliament, in which we regularly have misplaced confidence. Isn't that right? But the role of it. So, I think we're kind of at one. But and the phrase "identify with" is extremely dangerous. Like a lot of well-intentioned phrases, like people of colour, or like the Rainbow Coalition, not a good idea to give white skin a unique status. Not a good idea. Well-intentioned, but not a good idea. And you have a whole series of those things which lead to hell. Thank you.
Speaking of Man of Constant Sorrow, would either of you care to ruminate just for a moment or two about the last song on Modern Times, the title of which escapes me, but it begins with "As I Walked Out in a Crystal Garden." It strikes me as one of the most sorrowful songs he's ever made, and I'd just like to hear what you think about it.
Ain't walking.
Well, Ain't talking.
Yeah, exactly. Good.
I'm walking, ain't talking. I was going to end the talk I gave tonight with that song. And I was going to end it with that song as the true fruit of Man of Constant Sorrow, as something that, you know, to my mind, couldn't have been written, couldn't have been sung and performed the way it is, without Dylan having come to terms with Man of Constant Sorrow or other songs like it, as he began to do in the late 80s and early 90s. You know, Christopher talked about the inappropriateness or the wrongfulness, the shamefulness of the nightclub audience laughing at Lord Buckley's, you know, at certain moments in Lord Buckley's presentation of Hezekiah Jones. And in the bootleg album, that the version of Man of Constant Sorrow from the, you know, from 30 years later it came from, what you're hearing is Dylan, mostly in Europe, maybe in Australia, performing interludes in his shows where he's just there with a guitar by himself singing these very, very old folk songs. And all through it, you couldn't hear it so much on that performance. People are shouting, they're braying like dogs, they're whooping, they're having loud conversations, they're drunk. It's just bizarre. He is presenting these very, very delicate, breakable songs, and he's doing it with extraordinary passion and commitment, and people saying, "Hey, man!" And it just goes on and on and on, and it's really something. It's very hard to listen to. And I wanted to end with the way that he was able to. Well, Susie Rotolo, in her book about Greenwich Village, talks about a moment when she said he sang Dink's song, and it was as if I'd never heard the song before. He stilled the room, and then she says, he stilled my room for sure. And he is stilling the room there, even if it doesn't work. He's stilling the room. He's stilling his own room. And Ain't Talkin' has that same fatalism. The difference of it is it doesn't have acceptance. In Man of Constant Sorrow, there's nothing to be done. There are no friends. He's been abandoned by his lover. There's no sunshine. There's absolutely nothing. He's going to leave behind the land he's loved so well. And Ain't Talkin' is all about murder and vengeance and revenge. But it has the same simplicity, the same all taking place on one level, and the same sense of dread all through it. So you allowed me to end the way I was planning to.
I'd add one thing. I agree with what you say about it. It's immense number of things in it are from a great monodrama. They're from the monodrama that gave us the word monodrama. They're from Tennyson's Maud. If you think about what it is to walk out into the garden at night and be involved in revenge and duel, it's Tennyson's rewriting of the Hamlet story. It's got the duel, it's got the impossibility of redeeming any kind of redemption or reparation, except perhaps through the larger insanity of war. So it would even relate, and it's full of little details that are from that. I don't mean it alludes to it. I don't think at any point it says in the way in which other things in Dylan allude very explicitly to something, a particular film, a particular actor. It doesn't do that, but it drew it. I mean, he's very well read. It's well known, and again he finds not only in the experiences of life that are not reading. He never underrates the experience that is reading, or listening to other people's music, and so on. These are all experiences. He doesn't set experiences against experiences of the arts and so on. So I think it's a song which is illuminated if you see it in some ways under the aspect of thinking about a monodrama about madness, where with an extraordinary combination of midnight love with
hideous, hideous ill fate, and a duel, and of course the dead fathers and the necessary accoutrements. Thank you.
I was just curious, when you guys are doing your work, how often are you looking at his lyrics on a page, and how often are you listening to the track on repeat?
I'm never looking at the lyrics on the page, which is why I sometimes get them wrong. I listen over and over and over again. That's how.
I do look at them partly in order to help me get what the words are, and it's true that there are a group of us who meet every month, and we try to correct the lyrics as published, which of course are not offered as the words that he sings. At the time when all the lights went out, Jeff Rosen in Dylan's office was on the brink of suggesting to Dylan, he had said to me, I will talk to the man he calls Bob and I don't, I'll talk to him tomorrow, because he was doing those three nights in New York at that time, I'll talk to him tomorrow about your point. I said there should be a proper edition of the lyrics. That is, mostly people want the lyrics in order to get the words right from the, as it were, canonically issued albums. Now, it's true you pay a price for that because you fix them, but he's fixed them anyway. You see, what you've got is two different fix-it-is, and I think it isn't a help to have the lyrics, especially as even the latest version has terrible mistakes in it. So I had a huge document which was headed Reasons Why Jeff Rosen Should Change His Mind and Mr. Dylan's Mind, and Jeff was going to put it to him, and then Canada sabotaged the whole bloody thing. There should be a proper edition of the lyrics.
Thank you both for your comments tonight. I'm a big fan of the song Mississippi, especially the version off the bootleg albums. And it strikes me that song has kind of the same theme of kind of what we've been talking tonight. I was just wondering if you could maybe talk about your thoughts on that song. My one thought is that I feel like that song is maybe a more comprehensive look at life, kind of at the end of it. So.
You're sort of against the bootleg version, aren't you? You've gone into print as saying that it adds these versions that don't add anything.
Yeah, well, I think on his release Telltale Signs, there are 3 versions of it, and then there's a version that appeared on Love and Theft, and you know it just dries up for me. And Christopher has said that when there's a song I don't like, it doesn't even exist for me. I have nothing to say about it. I never say what's wrong with it, why it doesn't make it, and I guess that's true. You know, it just seems to be a song that never acquires the weight that it pretends to. And, you know, having 3 versions of it, if it's not getting to you in the start, it's like another one. This is going to be the one. This is going to be the one where it really comes together, when it captures the spark that somehow it's been missing. Well, another one. So probably Christopher can do a better job on this.
No, but I will point out, this is turning into sort of Punch and Judy show or something. I must say that I praised Greil. One can never praise a person enough, of course, really. But I praised him because I said this is part of his probity. I think it is true that if they don't reach him, he cannot evoke their not reaching himness. I'm different. I can come up with all kinds of factitious reasons. I can do what Hazlitt in a way said one had some nice, feign a relish till you have it. That is, Hazlitt didn't say spend the rest of your life feigning a relish, but you start, as we all did with classical music, isn't that right? We sat there listening to it thinking, will I ever enjoy this? Is it worth my being given a big Christmas present if I simper all the way through it and at the cost of my... So I think it is part of your probity. You only ever say what you believe. That's very good, though entertaining the thought that the song might be. I think it's a terrific song, and I think all the versions of it are very good. I even like, the 12 versions we got of Tell Old Bill. That's really test case. If you listen to Tell Old Bill in 12 successive versions, and you just think, God, that's good, and so on. But Mark Halliday, insufficiently taught by me in the old days, is nodding his head with a certain kind of rush, shaking it. Thank you.
If I can use, a little short here, Dylan as a jumping off point, it's been both of your writing about art and about music in particular, and the attention to detail that has given me great hope to see that in my peers and people who are creating art. And Dylan is such a shining figure in that, and both of your words about him have been very inspirational to me. And I'm wondering if you might be able to offer a few words of hope for someone from my generation who sees... an easy target is Kanye West's recent album which is I'm not denigrating it as a piece of work, but I'm wondering, I'm seeing criticism being thrown at it that is just filled with praise, and it's getting masterpiece reviews, and it fills me with such a sense of despair sometimes to see this, because it makes me wonder where's the challenge. And it's what I appreciate in your work that lets me know that people are willing to listen and put analysis into things, into the accidents, into all these things. And I'm wondering if you can give me a few words about what you see as a potential solution or steps towards a solution to people of my generation be able to listen to music in this way, because I don't see it in my peers very often.
Well, there is no hope. Which is always a good starting point. People are desperate to find masterpieces and to trumpet masterpieces, to flatter themselves that they are living in an age of wonders, and that they can identify a true wonder instantly. It doesn't, always happen that way, but that's how it happens. And there is a hysteria to praise work by all sorts of people, whether it's Jonathan Franzen's Freedom, or whether it's a new album by Jay-Z or Kanye West, who I have enormous affection for. I think is one of the really good people around. You just have to listen for yourself, argue with friends, and don't take seriously people who are really just trying to call attention to themselves and praise their own good taste and their own probity.
Ancient thoughts that we must always try not to use the best as the enemy of the good, and we must always try not to use the good as the enemy of the best, and we're in that position all the time. I thought it wrong of Frank Kermode to write about Beckett and C.P. Snow as novelists and give the impression that they were equally rewarding. And I think that was wrong, because it just didn't fulfill its obligations, which is to see that the best is the best, all right. Byron very beautifully thinks of a party in London and who the people are. Also, the 80 greatest living poets. The 80 great, and that, that's true of literary society again and again. Geoffrey Hill's inaugural lecture as Professor of Poetry in Oxford. Friends, of course, always tell you if something unfortunate has been said about you. So they came promptly to me after Geoffrey had given his inaugural. Geoffrey Hill began by talking about Shakespeare and slander. He ended with talking about Paul Celan and translations. He said that Christopher Ricks made a mistake in publishing a book on Bob Dylan. And so on. So, I mean, that is, one can't do the right thing in a way. But I don't know, do not presume one of the thieves was damned. Do not despair. One of the thieves was saved. A reasonable percentage. Remember, Beckett says, a reasonable percentage. So there's some room. The best way to get good new things is to attend properly to good old things. That is, the best way to, Rosanna Warren, my colleague, was always saying, the best way to learn to write is to learn to read. And there will be better poems if people read existing poems. And the great thing about the past in the arts is that it hasn't gone. An immense number of things have gone from the past and are simply irretrievable. But the great songs and the great non-songs, the great everything, they're all there if you want them. But getting attention for them, I agree. Perhaps we should stop. No, you should say one more thing.
No, that's a lovely ending. Thank you so much.